The Chicago Bears' joint practice with the Cincinnati Bengals today will be more important than the preseason game on Saturday, because at this practice, we'll actually get to see the starters.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Make every moment more. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus every day. So visit FanDuel.com to get started. On the show today, we look at what the Chicago Bears need to accomplish in their one-day joint practice against the Cincinnati Bengals, where the Bears offense will get to face a fresh defense that might be a little bit more of a level playing field for them. The Bears defense will get to face a Bengals offense that's a little bit more fine-tuned than the Bears offense they've been practicing against. And most importantly, this Bears team as a whole is getting healthier, and they need to keep it that way against the Bengals, and it might even be a little bit easier or somehow, better able to stay healthy against an opponent like this compared to their usual practice schedule. But I want to start with Caleb Williams, because everything starts with Caleb Williams. And I think he's got a great opportunity in this joint practice to really stretch his legs metaphorically here and try some new things out against a new opponent. He's been practicing against Jalen Johnson, Tyreek Stevenson, Kevin Byard, Jaquan Brisker, etc., throughout all of training camp and the offseason. I mean, we know Brisker was out with injury for a while. Kyler Gordon's been out with injury for a while. So it's not always the full complement of the secondary. But nonetheless, it's the secondary that has been together for 2 or 3 seasons, playing in Matt Eberflus's defense for 2 or 3 seasons. These guys are dialed in and have really been ahead of the curve and ahead of the offense through a lot of this process, understandably so. But now Caleb Williams can go up against a new secondary that he isn't used to, that he doesn't know the tendencies of nearly as well. He doesn't know what he knows what Jalen Johnson likes and doesn't like, knows how Tyreek Stevenson covers certain routes and other routes. And so after a few weeks, guys become a little bit more predictable in some ways, and you know to throw certain routes certain ways, and maybe you start to take advantage of those sort of like gamesmanship type things that maybe then you're not having to be testing yourself in some of the same type of ways. But the Bengals present a new matchup, and I think more importantly, this Bengals secondary that he's going up against has a lot of new or younger parts all kind of still coming together, like the Bears offense. Like, the Bears offense has been going against a defense that's a well-oiled machine, really kind of sharp at their peak kind of group. This Bengals secondary struggled a bit last season, has some young players and now some new faces as well across the board. So it's a lot of guys trying to get used to each other. Kind of like the Bears have Keenan Allen getting used to DJ Moore, getting used to a rookie Rome Odunze, all getting used to a new offense. The Bengals secondary has a bunch of new or relatively new players all trying to get used to each other either. So I think that levels the playing field a little bit more. I'm not 100% sure on the exact health of who's going to be at practice and who's not, but you look at this Bengals secondary across the board. You've got 2 really young outside cornerbacks. DJ Turner on one side is entering his second season, started 12 games as a rookie and was okay. And then on the other side, you've got Cam Taylor-Britt, who's entering his third season and really only started about half of each of the first 2 seasons. So Cam Taylor-Britt has 21 career starts under his belt. DJ Turner has 12. Guys like DJ Moore and Keenan Allen going against them will have an advantage in terms of experience and just sort of that veteran savvy of being able to take on younger cornerbacks. Then on the back end in the Bengals secondary, you've got Geno Stone at free safety and Von Bell at strong safety. Neither one of those players was with the Cincinnati Bengals last season. Both signed with the team as free agents this offseason. Geno Stone coming over from the Baltimore Ravens, where he played really well, but is entering his 4th or 5th season in the NFL. And then Von Bell was with the Carolina Panthers last year. Worth noting that Von Mel had previously played for the Cincinnati Bengals with this defensive coordinator, so it's not like he's brand new to the scheme, but he is getting to know a brand new safety next to him, and he wasn't with DJ Turner on the Bengals and barely played with Cam Taylor-Britt on the Bengals. So the only returning guy in this Bengals secondary that has been there for the long run is Mike Hilton, their slot cornerback. He played with Von Bell for a couple seasons. He's been in this Bengals defense for a while, so there's some experience there. But otherwise, young cornerbacks, brand new safeties, all trying to get to know each other. And that doesn't mean they're going to be terrible and that the Bears offense should light them up and absolutely dominate them. But it should be a little bit of a different dynamic of just as the Bears are trying to figure some things out with their quarterback and receivers, the Bengals are trying to figure some things out with their cornerbacks and safeties. So it feels like it's a little bit more of a level playing field of like experience and group familiarity that should be a different kind of test and a good measuring stick for this Bears offense. Like trying to measure the Bears offense against the Bears defense isn't quite fair because they're just at different stages of this process of developing their side of the ball. But it feels like this Bengals defense, well, they've had the same scheme for a little while. The new players in the secondary bring them a little bit closer to the Bears, who have a bunch of new players and a new scheme that they're all trying to learn there. I'm also really want to see this Bears offensive line go up against some different pass rushers. In particular, I'm circling Braxton Jones going up against Trey Hendrickson. You know, when at Bears practice, Montez Sweat lines up against the right tackle, Darnell Wright. That's the side of the defensive line he plays on. Trey Hendrickson, the Bengals' best pass rusher, goes on the left side. So it'll be a different kind of test for Braxton Jones going against one of the better pass rushers in the NFL in Trey Hendrickson. You know, he's been one of the most productive, pressure generators over the last couple of seasons. Maybe doesn't get the same kind of publicity, but definitely an effective pass rushing threat on that side. And someone who has quite a variety of pass rushing moves as well. There's a guy who does a Substack it's a newsletter called Pre-Snap Tells. His name is Joseph Ferriola. I don't know how to pronounce his last name, where he does a bunch of analytics, and he had a great pass rusher report on Trey Hendrickson that really goes in depth. He has one of the fastest get-off speeds for edge rushers in the NFL. Like getting off the line of scrimmage, he reaches almost 5 miles an hour in half a second. Puts him in the 90th percentile for quick off the snap. So that's gonna test Braxton Jones in a different way than DeMarcus Walker, and even Dominic Robinson to some extent, who's been practicing against a lot on the other side, also reaches an average of 9.5 miles an hour within 2.5 seconds. Like he is quick and gets good leverage, and also has a variety of pass rush moves. This Substack tracks Hendrickson's pass rush moves too. He goes outside 38% of the time, inside 31% of the time, and bull rush 30% of the time. We know Braxton Jones has struggled a little bit with the bull rush, and that's something Trey Hendrickson does a good job of taking that speed and converting it into power. But he's most effective working the outside, and bull rush is definitely his weakest move, so it might be a good test for Braxton Jones to say, this guy's going to bull rush me sometimes, but he's not an expert at it, but he's got the physical tools to be great at it. But the technique is not always exactly where it needs to be, and same is true for Braxton Jones trying to absorb the bull rush. So I think it'll be a really good test for him on that side of the line. He's not going to get it all the time, but when he does get it, it'll be a different bull rush than he's used to all the guys who he kind of knows all the pass rush moves of everybody who's been lining up against him in practice. Kind of knows, okay, I know what DeMarcus Walker likes to do. I know what Austin Booker likes to use, but now it's a new pass rusher and probably a better pass rusher than any of the guys he's been going up against at practice. So it'll be a good test for Braxton Jones and, of course, the rest of this Chicago Bears offensive line. I think we see a similar dynamic on the other side of the ball where this Bears defense will face a quarterback like Joe Burrow that, as good as Caleb Williams has been, Caleb Williams is not up to Joe Burrow's level yet. So we'll kind of look at what's in store for this Bears secondary and the defensive line getting a different kind of test as well next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. BetterHelp provides online therapy that's here to help you be your best self. We all live busy lives with full schedules, whether it's your kids with all sorts of summer activities or just big projects at work and other people in your life that count on you. It's easy to lose time for yourself, to take care of yourself, be your best, and at the very least, be able to be at 100%, to be there for all the people that rely on you in your life, let alone actually enjoying yourself and having some self-care in there. So it's important to make time for yourself and have non-negotiables like therapy. I do therapy online every single week, and it's a really important part of my own personal mental health regimen, and it's why I recommend BetterHelp if you've been thinking about starting therapy, because it's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. You just fill out a brief questionnaire, and then they match you with a licensed therapist. And if that therapist isn't the right fit for you, that's okay. You can change therapists at any time for no additional charge. So never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Just as it feels like the Bengals defense is maybe a little bit closer to the Bears offense in their process of developing, so too is this Bengals offense a little closer to this Bears defense, where, yeah, there's a lot of new parts in the Bengals secondary that's all trying to figure each other out. But this Bengals offense, and specifically Joe Burrow and some of his top receivers, like, they've all worked together for 2, 3, 4 years. They've all had Zach Taylor in the same offensive system for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Like, this offense in Cincinnati isn't necessarily learning a bunch of new plays or trying to figure out chemistry and timing on certain routes and, you know, how they want to handle certain concepts and what kind of tweaks and adjustments that they want to make, as opposed to like the Bears offense that's still figuring, okay, how does Keenan run this route? How does DJ run that route? How does Caleb throw certain throws? Like, this Bengals offense has that pretty well locked down, at least with the guys that have been there. Not every single player on the 90-man roster or across the offense has all been there, but like, you've got guys with plenty of experience in this offense so that they can come out confident and not thinking out there and just playing loose and kind of relaxing the same way that the Bears defense is. I mean, we just talked about it with all the cornerbacks and everyone but Kevin Byard, essentially, all has been there, all in the same scheme. That's why they've been able to be so confident and generally ahead of the Bears offense at practice. Well, now they're facing an offense that they're not going to be as ahead of in that regard. But we get a big asterisk added here this week when star Bengals wide receiver Ja'Marr Chase didn't show up to practice after having practiced throughout the preseason thus far, and now has begun a hold out. He had been kind of doing a hold in, where he was there and hanging around and not happy with his contract situation. It sounds like my understanding is there was some kind of terms in his current contract where there were training camp based bonuses that he had to be there for the first X number of training camp practices or hit a certain number of training camp practices to collect a bonus. And now he hit that bonus and still wants a new contract. So he's now no longer participating in practices, and they're calling the situation day to day, but it's a contract dispute more than anything else. But that takes, obviously, the number one wide receiver out of the practice for the Bengals. And after they let Tyler Boyd go this offseason, it kind of just leaves T. Higgins as far as like the actual wide receivers that are going to present potential matchup challenges for this Bears secondary. Because you look at the rest of the Bengals receiving core, they've got there's no one else that you'll have ever heard of except for maybe their third-round pick this year. Jermaine Burton was a guy we talked about a little bit in the pre-draft process coming out of, I believe, Alabama. He was a receiver there this past season. So you maybe have heard of him. But everyone else in this Bengals receiving core is not anybody who would ever be drafted in your fantasy league or has made any sort of significant NFL impact. Trenton Irwin and Andre Isovius were both part of the offense last season. I think Charlie Jones was their fourth-round pick last year. They've all been around a little bit, but like none of these guys have ever had more than 50 catches in their careers. You know, none of these guys have ever played more than 35 games in their career. We're talking like a season or two at most of real experience for any of these other wide receivers not named T. Higgins, now that Ja'Marr Chase is not participating. And I suppose the Ja'Marr Chase situation is one that could change at a moment's notice, and maybe he'll show up for joint practices. I mean, as of the time I'm recording this, he's not participating in practice, doesn't have any kind of new deal in place. It's always possible. That's the danger of podcasting, right? It's like, well, you never know. After I hit publish, or after I'm done recording, the news can change. But for now, it's Higgins and a bunch of nobodies, which will be then less of a great test for this Bears secondary. But I still think when it's Joe Burrow throwing to any receivers he's familiar with, like he's thrown passes to Irwin and Isovius and Charlie Jones before. Like it's not like it's brand new guys whereas like Caleb Williams is throwing to brand new receivers that he just doesn't know and he's still learning. Burrow knows all these guys, even if the guys aren't as talented as Ja'Marr Chase and Tyler Boyd would have been in practice. There's still going to be a certain level of like crispness and being on top of things and sharp, confident understanding of the offense. These receivers all know the plays. They know the routes. They know how Burrow likes certain routes run. They know how certain plays should be adjusted on the fly, and they can have a lot of that nonverbal communication of quarterback and receiver on the same page that just Caleb and the Bears offense can't quite do. So it should test the Bears secondary in some different ways, even if they're not nearly as talented as Allen and Moore and Odunze or Jamar Chase and Tyler Boyd. There's still an experience factor there that can make a big difference at these practices, and it'd just be a nice little change of pace for this Bears secondary. It's also a big change of pace for the Bears defensive line. Like, we want to see this starting group prove to us that they can be an effective pass rush that doesn't need a Unique Ngakoue or some other sort of outside free agent pass rusher brought in to bolster this group. And when I look at the Bengals offensive line in particular, I really want to see these Bears defensive tackles and Gervon Dexter in particular flash, dominate, make some big plays. Because I think we've all heard about Gervon Dexter's body being in good shape and running the conditioning test with the defensive ends and all that stuff. But like at practice, Tevin Jenkins and the Bears have had a variety of right guards at this point, but Nate Davis and Ryan Bates and Matt Pryor and then the centers, Coleman Shelton and stuff, like the interior of the Bears offensive line. By now, they kind of know Gervon Dexter's moves, right? They know he's big and fast and strong and hard to sort of stay in front of, but like he's still working on the pad level and the pass rush moves and the hand placement and stuff. And like generally, like Tevin Jenkins is going to win that technique battle. I think, I don't want to say the majority of the time because I don't know that to be certain, but like, the Bears guards and stuff are going to have better technique. They're going to learn like pretty quickly after a couple weeks the best ways to stay in front of Gervon Dexter and just not let him outspeed and muscle you. But like it's new interior offensive linemen for Cincinnati, at least new for the Bears to face. There's guys that have been around and guys that I think have been generally, mediocre to decent. I mean, their left guard, Cordell Volson, was a 4th-round pick a couple seasons ago. He's been all right. They got a veteran center in Ted Karras, who's, again, like, he's not making Pro Bowls, but he's all, but he holds down the job. Like, he's all right. And the right guard, Alex Kappa from the Bengals, he's had some ups and downs, but has had some better moments. I think the ceiling is a little bit higher there for a guy like Kappa coming out of a small school. I remember him at the Senior Bowl, dominating a little bit. So, like, they're not terrible. Like, it's not like the Bears defensive tackles should dominate them, like I said. But, like, these are not Pro Bowl interior guys that they're going up against. So, like, all right, they don't know you, Gervon Dexter. They don't know your moves. They're not scouting you for this joint practice. So flash them a little bit, beat them, kind of surprise them with, holy crap, this guy's quick off the snap. Oh, this guy's stronger than I thought. Like, your technique doesn't have to be perfect when they haven't been able to really properly scout you and get to know what to expect from you at practice. So, like, use the element of surprise to your advantage. Like, maybe it's not as sustainable, but like, use it. Take advantage of it. Like, the Bengals are not going to be a team on your schedule this season, right? It's not like you're afraid of showing them something that they're going to be able to then use against you in week 10 or later on in your schedule this season. So it's a little bit less vanilla than the preseason game that's going to be tape that everyone can watch. But NFL teams aren't getting tape of this joint practice. So the Bears are going to scheme stuff up on both sides of the ball, test some different things out, and maybe push the Bengals in some ways that you're not going to see in the preseason game on Saturday. And that's where I think this practice is so important. And it's a great opportunity for guys to show us against a real opponent that doesn't know them. Show us the kind of progress you've made from day one of training camp to whatever day we're on now, which is, more than 14 days of training camp practice up to this point. Let's see what you can do against some starters, because we're not going to see the Cincinnati Bengals starters on Saturday. Zach Taylor has already announced that, and I'm expecting Matt Eberflus will soon announce that the Chicago Bears starters won't play either. That's not locked in, but I predict they won't end up playing their starters against the Bengals on Saturday, which makes this joint practice that much more important, especially as the Bears starters have gotten healthier and healthier. And so I want to check in on where the Bears are getting some of their key players back, who is still missing out on practice, and why I have a theory that this joint practice with the Bengals may actually be a little bit safer injury-wise than the practices than a normal practice against a lot of your teammates, even though the intensity might get dialed up a little bit more. But I'll explain next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Make every moment more. all summer long because FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day throughout the rest of the summer. So whether you want to bet on the Bears-Bengals preseason betting line, you can bet on Bears-Titans week 1, where the Bears are, I think, 4.5-point favorites in that game. You can bet on Matt Eberflus to win Coach of the Year, Caleb Williams to win Offensive Rookie of the Year, and so much more. Or there's the baseball season. We're right in the thick of, we're turning around to the playoff hunt here in a moment. You've got soccer and tennis and the combat sports. I mean, they've got all your sports betting needs at FanDuel Sportsbook, all in an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. So to make the most out of the rest of your summer, head over to FanDuel.com. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. So we might not see the Chicago Bears starters on Saturday regardless, but we will see most of them at the joint practice on Thursday because in Wednesday's practice, the Bears continue to get good news on the injury front and continue to avoid bad news on the injury front. We call it the inverse Minnesota Vikings, where J.J. McCarthy's now ruled out for the season, and then at Vikings practice on Wednesday, Jordan Addison went down. I think I read carted off with an injury. We'll see the severity of that, but like Vikings are dropping like flies. Bears were dropping like flies, but now are getting healthy at the right time for this joint practice. We'll see, guys have been doing more of what they call the ramp up period. So we'll see exactly how much they're going to go in the joint practice, but healthy or not expecting to see the starters on Saturday. So that's where getting these guys back out there for this Bengals practice is that much more important. So if we start by checking in from yesterday's practice on Wednesday, we saw that Kyler Gordon and Tyreek Stevenson were back in pads participating. Nate Davis has been participating for the next couple days in a row. Montez Sweat has been back at practice participating again. And really, you're only missing 2 main starters from the Bears right now due to injury. Ryan Bates on the offensive line and Jaquan Brisker at safety. A couple other, rotational guys and backups, Colin Johnson, Jacob Martin, Adrian Colbert, DeAndre Carter. They're also not participating in practice. But heading into the Bengals practice, you may only be missing Ryan Bates and Jaquan Brisker. Again, we'll see if Kyler Gordon and Tyreek Stevenson and Nate Davis are fully 100% participating or if they're just going to do warm-up and walk-through type stuff. But regardless, this is as healthy as we've seen the Chicago Bears starting lineup, at least, in, dare I say, weeks. Certainly a significant stretch of days at training camp practice, just in time for the real practice that's going to matter even more than if the starters had played in the preseason game, because everything is going to be just a little bit less vanilla. But good to see these guys getting back together and building some of that chemistry ahead of the regular season, as opposed to 3 days before the week 1 game, everybody's good to go and they kind of take the field and hadn't really practiced all that much together. It's good to get some of those reps in now just to build a little bit more of that chemistry and familiarity and cohesion and say, all right, this is what it's really going to feel like when we're doing it for real in the regular season. And I can't help but feel like this practice against the Bengals is not a significant injury risk, more than any regular practice. And I would argue almost even less than a regular practice. Players have this understanding. And we heard, I think it was Andrew Billings at the press conference. I mixed up for sure whether it was Billings that said it, but I'm pretty sure it was Billings that said, veterans at these crossover practices, they know, we're not trying to hurt the guys on the other team. It's going to be more intense. It's someone who's not your teammate. You're not trying to hurt your teammates either. But he's we kind of have this understanding that if you're not too hard on my body, I'm not going to be too hard on your body. So let's kind of agree to take it easy and be a little bit more chill. You're not trying to ring the other guy's bell. Certainly you can't touch the quarterbacks either way anyway. But also I think because you're going to see a little bit more of that energy and intensity when guys are playing faster. Sometimes that can be safer, especially if they're also limiting hits, right? They talk a lot of if you're going slow and trying to be too careful, that's when you can take the wrong step and make mistakes, and you're not playing fast and loose. You're tight and you're tense, and then the contact that you have can sometimes be too tense on those muscles and tendons and ligaments or whatever, and then there's too much tension on there, and that can cause some of these injuries. But when you're fast and loose and dialed up and going full speed, it's safer in a lot of ways because, again, it's not a game where you're really trying to hit and hurt these guys, but you're still going full speed up to that point. And I just think certainly it's not going to be like, perfectly safe or like drastically safer than a regular practice. But I think there's something to be said about like, all right, these guys are going to be a little bit more fired up. And not that they're like jogging and taking it easy all the time when you're going against your teammates, but I think you're going to be a little bit faster, a little bit looser, and a little bit more intense. And as a result, your bodies are going to play a little bit more freely and not hold as much of that tension and thinking and processing. It's just like, nope, we're going to play football and it's going to mean a little bit more to us and we're going to be willing to kind of flow with it. And I think as a result, you're a little bit less likely to suffer some of the same kind of injuries. That doesn't mean there can't still be injuries or won't still be injuries and all that stuff, but like I think the Bears and the Bengals are both experienced enough teams across the board to understand how to do this right to get the most out of practice without adding any risk, and if anything, maybe even subtracting a little bit of risk with guys that respect each other and guys that are going to be intense and go all out, but not really put anything at injury risk. And the Bears have been very clear as far when it comes to like fights at practices like these. Like if you get in a fight, you're getting kicked out of practice for the rest of that day. You're not going to be out there with your teammates. Like I think things are going to be fairly smooth from an operation standpoint, and it's really going to be beneficial for both sides of the party. And so that's why I think we're again going to hear Matt Eberflus after the joint practice say, that was a great joint practice. The starters have earned the preseason game off because we saw everything we needed to against the Bengals. That's what he said last season after they had joint practices against the Indianapolis Colts before they played the Indianapolis Colts. They didn't play starters in that game. Now you have the Bengals already saying before the practice, yeah, we're not going to play our starters on Saturday. The joint practice will be enough. I would be surprised if Matt Eberflus goes out there and says, you know what? I want my starters playing against the Bengals backups. Like, yeah, I mean, personally, I still want Caleb Williams out there for a drive or two just because he and Rome Odunze, like the young guys, need as much experience as possible. Just like I would have played them in the Hall of Fame game too. Like, I don't need Keenan Allen out there. I don't need Kevin Byard and Montez Sweat out there, but like, give me the young guys out there, keep them safe. There's ways you can call plays and run concepts that are going to limit the contact a quarterback's going to have. I mean, you can do a lot of different things to limit your injury risk in preseason games, but give them the reps because the reps are absolutely valuable. I don't think we're going to see the reps, and I think it's going to be mostly backups on Saturday against the Bengals. Regardless, there's still a lot of position battles that will be determined by what happens in that game and the last preseason game. A lot to still take away, even if it's just going to be backups on Saturday. So we're going to break down everything to watch for in Bears-Bengals on Saturday as part of tomorrow's podcast here on Locked On Bears. So make sure then that you hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you're listening to the podcast, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you're looking for your second listen, why don't you listen for one of your other teams, your fantasy football team with Locked On Fantasy Football, with daily insight to the best fantasy draft strategies and certainly in-season waiver wire updates and lineup decisions to help you win your league this season. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hope you'll come back to Locked On Bears, make us your first listen again tomorrow so that you can get another opportunity to bear down.